Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Sophie Irwin. Sophie has spent years immersed in the study of historical fiction, from a dissertation on why Georgette Heyer helped win World War II, to time spent in dusty stacks and old tomes doing detailed period research when writing this book. Her love and passion for historical fiction bring a breath of fresh air and a contemporary energy to the genre. Her debut novel is A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, and joining me today to talk about that and so much more is Sophie Irwin. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Sophie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to dig into all of this because there's a lot of words in that introduction that I want to talk about. But before I do, I have to ask you one simple question, which is, Sophie, tell me, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, mine begins, and I'm sure this was true for many of the authors on your podcast, with reading, really. I was a massive reader the whole of my childhood. First of all, with fantasy. Fantasy was the massive love of my life when I was growing up. Loved fantasy. And then I got into historical fiction when I was about 13. My granny gave me a big stack of old Georgette Heyer novels. And I can remember vividly looking at them, and they were these like really fragile, peeling, like loose-leafed books, and I was like, those look really boring. And obviously read them, fell madly in love with historical fiction as the best escapism I'd ever really known, and which is sort of a love affair that sort of continued for the rest of my life so far, really. So then I read everything historical fiction I could get my hands on. I did my dissertation at university on historical romance and Georgette Heyer. And then I hopped across into publishing, and that was my job for about 5 years. And I was working on the women's fiction team, so got to do loads of romance, loads of rom-coms, historical fiction, which was brilliant. And then I guess I'd written a bit growing up. Like, I'd loved creative writing growing up, and it was a huge dream of mine at that stage to be a writer. But I think that I got to sort of 16, 17, 18 and really put that to the side as sort of a bit of a pipe dream, and cracked on with career, go for it, and sort of let the childish sort of dreams go. That's so sad. And it wasn't until 2019 that I had the idea for this book, and started very slowly writing it. Sort of to begin with, I was trying almost not to scare it away. So I didn't tell anybody. It was a huge secret. And then 2020 lockdown, suddenly had much more time because the commute, I'd got back this commute time, and I started to write it properly. And then zoom forward, got an agent, got a publishing deal, and here we are.
Wow, that's a great story. But you decided, you were working in, I would say, the industry. Not as a writer, but you were working in the publishing industry. Was that your first job after university, or?
No, I did. I've done all sorts, really. I've had a job since I was 13. So after university, I lived at home for a year, worked in hospitality, worked in events, earned money to come to London, because in the UK, I think it's kind of similar in America, where publishing is in London, really. It's getting better, but it's in London. So I earned money to come to London. And then my first job in publishing was as a PA to the managing director. Which was fast-paced and exciting and very interesting and stressful, sure. And then I worked my way across into editorial, which is where I wanted to be. Which was fantastic. I loved it. Editing was a dream job for me.
What was it about historical fiction that really drew you in, when you were younger? Why? Because I get fantasy, right? But when you're younger, it's like historical fiction. What was it about it that really spoke to you, that really kind of lit a fire inside you?
It's interesting that you talk about fantasy there, because actually sometimes I kind of think the appeal of historical fiction is quite close to fantasy, and especially with stuff set in the sort of Regency Georgian period, which is where sort of my passion lies. because it's such like a distinctive world, which is different to ours, relatable because, it's still people and humans and we can understand it, but it's so distinct, so different, so has such a distinct visual style as well, which can feel kind of almost fantastical sometimes, even though it actually existed. And I think it's just the appeal of an escapism which is totally different to your current day, I think is so powerful. And especially when the backdrops feel very rich and decadent, and you have this like gorgeous texture underlying the whole, all of the plot and structure, which I think it just feels like it has a feeling to me, almost like a texture, historical fiction, where you can just dive in and it feels rich and gorgeous in a way that it's just incredibly seductive somehow.
Yeah. But there's a little bit of pressure though there too, I imagine, when you're writing it, because you've got to get your facts right. I mean, there is a little fantasy in there, right? But you've got to, you're painting a picture of a world that did exist. And, even though the events that you might be writing about, may not have happened, the backdrop has to be realistic. So tell me about the research process and your feelings about that.
Oh, research is like my greatest love and my greatest challenge all in one go, because it's so much fun. I loved it. And I just read and read and read and read. And I walked around London with like old maps and looking at stuff and seeing what changed. And I read letters and diaries and everything. And that was so much fun. But the challenge of conveying in-depth research lightly so that you can show people, you can build a world, but not overwhelm them with like a non-fiction book when you're trying to be doing fiction. That was really challenging. And then also you just have to check everything. And it's not even just the big things you have to check about, sort of, what do they eat and what clothes do they wear and things like that. It's like, what kind of chair would they sit on? And what was it made of? And what kind of pavement quality was there? What were the roads like? It's tiny things which actually are quite hard to find out. So that was a lengthy process, and actually have to give credit to my editorial team, my editors, my proofreaders, my copy editors, who were also really on it about being like, check this, check this, check this, check this. So even if after I'd written it and we were editing it and everything like that, we were still checking stuff and looking for stuff, to make sure, as you say, you need it to be believable, because I think the first thing that puts the reader out of the story, that's you haven't done your job properly. Yeah. Which I'm sure there's still tiny things left in there that I've got wrong, and I will get right for the next book, I promise, but I try my best.
Well, what can you tell me about A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting? Tell me, what does this story mean to you? What's it about? Why did you think about writing it now?
Yes. Okay. So I'll give you my pitch first, which is, so it's a historical rom-com. It's set in 1818 in Regency, England. And my heroine, the main character of the book, is Kitty Talbot. And she's the eldest of 5 sisters, and her family are hugely in debt. And in order to save her sisters from certain ruin, she has to get a lot of money, and she has to get a lot of money fast. So Kitty heads off to London to try and find herself a rich husband. But it's not as simple as that, or else I wouldn't have written a book about it. So Kitty has first got to learn how to walk, talk, act, speak, everything like an aristocratic young lady. And she sort of has to use every trick, every bit of cleverness, resource she has to get what she wants. And she's absolutely determined to do it, to pull it off. And no one, not even the very dashing Lord Radcliffe, is going to stand in her way. So, God, it was so much fun to write. I loved it. I wanted to write it because I love the genre so much. But one of the, I suppose, gaps or tropes that I was quite interested in is that often in historical fiction, often in historical romance, and especially sort of like your original, Georgette Heyer time, the heroines are sort of morally pure. They're sort of ethically superior. They're never greedy. They're always super kind and generous, and they're rewarded with like a hero, often rich hero, but they're never after his money. And I remember walking to work one day and I was thinking about sort of how romantic that concept of marriage is, as sort of the man as reward for the women's good behavior. But actually, like at the time, you had this like one high stakes moment to make a good marriage. And if you're a woman of a certain class with no means of supporting yourself otherwise, that was a huge decision. And you had to get it right, and you had to do it well, because it would dictate everything that came after, not just for you, but for your family. And I was sort of imagining what it would be like to see a slightly more calculated heroine who is very aware of sort of the economics of marriage, of the high financial stakes, and to see her sort of attack it in the same way that modern women attack their careers, was sort of how Kitty came to be. And that was the real starting point, was that sort of idea of what it would be like to see sort of an unashamed heroine. So that's where it came from.
So somebody who's maybe a little bit ahead of her time in that regard.
And just without, or just honest about what she's after. Because you would like, if I was there back then and you had this one moment, you would go after the richest guy. You just would. So it's quite funny when we sort of want to gloss over that. But yeah, if you need money that badly, you'd go for it.
Yeah, I also kind of laugh a little bit at the notion of like a man being sort of the reward for good behavior. It's definitely, hopefully an outdated notion,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Not to be self-deprecating, but I would never want to be somebody's reward for good behavior. Like,
I know,
more like somebody's punishment for bad behavior. I mean, it sounds like, she's a bit of a fish out of water. Is she sort of coming from her background? Did you have fun with that? I mean, was there some comedy in there? Sort of any kind of missteps?
It was so much fun. And yeah, I think the brilliant thing about having a character who, as you say, is a fish out of water, is that you are able to convey the rules and also break them. Because otherwise, there's so many rules around what women could do back then that narratively it's quite a challenge to get them to do interesting things, because they're not allowed to do anything interesting. So that was what was great about Kitty, was that I could sort of show her breaking the rules a little bit and bending things. And we did, and it was really fun to see her make mistakes. That was always my favorite bit to write. It's the friction that sort of arrives when she gets something wrong. She doesn't know she's got it wrong because she doesn't even know the rule she's broken. So that was really good fun, for sure.
Yeah, she sounds like a fun character to certainly write. You mentioned kind of when you were kind of starting your career, you were putting your, I can't remember if you used the word childish or your kind of younger ambitions aside. Now you've had the chance to sort of not only, I don't want to say indulge them, but kind of feed them. And you found the agent, you've gotten it published. How does that sort of inner child in you feel right now, having kind of accomplished these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's all happened so fast. I haven't really had a moment to really appreciate that. But yeah, it is, I guess, vindicating hugely, yes. I weirdly feel a lot of tenderness for that past self who thought that was like something that I was never going to get to have. And it's so bizarre looking back at yourself and not knowing the route your life's going to go back down. It's quite a bizarre thing. Yeah, I guess that's how I feel. It's so funny that I really, really firmly didn't think this was in my future, and then it sort of happened anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, bizarre.
I think that's what I love most about your story. I do believe that we have all these different parts of self inside us, right? So we've got our inner child, our inner teenager, we've got our adult, we've got our future adult, we just don't know who they are yet. But we have to feed each of those pieces someone, right? We have to feed that inner child sometime. We have to feed that inner teen sometime, because they're all still part of us,
100%. Yeah. And I think the thing that stopped me writing, which is interesting when you talk about like your inner childhood, that sort of journey, we think of it as a very linear journey from child to adult. And children are very good at trying things and being open with making mistakes and possibly being embarrassed, but cracking on anyway. And adults generally aren't. And that for me was the big thing writing. I didn't want to be caught trying at something I might be bad at. So that's why it was sort of put away. But as you say, you have to sort of try and retain some of that childlike ability to try and fail and carry on anyway. Absolutely.
So I have 3 children. They're all the same age. They're 20 years old now. So we have triplets. And just kind of looking back on their lives, it's really interesting because there was a time when everybody would be over the house, family,
Mm.
friends, and the kids they'd want to do something artistic, right? They'd want to put on a
Mm.
show. They were always putting on shows for us, right?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
they were drawing and they want to show us their pictures, or,
Mm.
just doing something really creative. And there comes a time in development where that just stops, and it doesn't even feel like it
Yeah.
fades away. Like it just stops, where they don't want to perform anymore. They feel silly sharing
Mm.
their artwork. I mean, one of my daughters is such a wonderful artist, but she doesn't want to show anybody her work. And I
Yeah.
think I don't know if that's like, one of the downsides to growing up and maturing, but something happens, like
Mm.
societally, something happens where there's an off switch. Um,
Yeah.
and then maybe you find that inner child later in life. I think you certainly did, because you got this book written and published and all that good stuff. But
Oh, thank
I just
you.
like to
Yeah,
encourage
no, it's so strange.
yeah.
No, I was gonna say you're so right, because it's like suddenly a world where playing and performing is such a huge part of everyday life, and then lying in the sand, it's not anymore. And you've got to. It's bizarre because we still have that need to play and be playful. So where it goes, I don't know.
Yeah. And maybe we play in different ways as we get older, but I
Mm.
think there's
Mm.
always that like person inside us that wants to just like go run outside in the rain,
Yeah.
or just like draw a picture or write a story.
Yeah.
And or just do something. I don't know. I'd like to encourage everyone who listens to this to just like feed that inner child at some point in time,
Yeah.
keep that inner child well fed.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there we go. What's next for you? Are you working on sort of a follow up to this, or?
Yeah, book two. So I'm editing book two at the moment. So it's set in the same world, same time period, but different characters. It follows a woman called Eliza, who is in a very unhappy marriage of convenience until, fortunately, her husband dies, leaving her rich. Very rich.
Fortunately, yeah,
Fortunately, yeah. She doesn't kill him, but it is fortunate.
that's right.
Leaving her really rich and wondering what happens next. Sort of the marriage plot is finished before the book starts, and then she sort of carries on. But I found book two really hard. I don't know, because I know you're an author as well, so and you've written a lot of books, so I'm hoping you're going to tell me that 3, 4, 5 are easier than 2.
I think so. My point of view is, especially if you've got a big hit with your first book, and this is the same with musicians too, right? So bands whose first album is very good, they've got a lot of pressure for that second album to be, as good or if not better. Writers, I think, face the same thing. And fortunately for me, my second book was far and away better than the first. I like to I kind of make fun of that first book, but with the first book that was published, there were a bunch that were not before that one. But no, there was pressure, but I'd say, just kind of be true to yourself and your process, and write what feels good to you. And that your editor will have feedback later. There'll be time for that. So just kind of tell the story you want to tell, and then the rest will kind of work itself out. I think so anyway. I think so. But there's a big learning curve. There's a big learning curve with that first. I mean, what is, if you had to say, like, what are the big lessons you learned about yourself as you were writing and going through the publishing process for that first book?
Yeah, I think the main thing I learned, which is the main thing I think I would want to pass on to people if I was ever in a position to be asked my advice, which is the main challenge for me, is getting through the first draft and driving on, even though you sort of hate yourself, because the first draft is so bad. And you have to, the trick for me, I don't think I'm necessarily a particularly good writer, but I think I got through that first bit. And people don't often. People can find that too hard and too overwhelming, because you're used to reading these amazing books and you think, the gap's so big here. How can I ever possibly be good enough? And the trick I found is just carrying on anyway. And then the second draft, you can make it much better. So that was my main challenge of book one, which is what was good about book one, is I had a lot of time. So whereas book two, suddenly I had a deadline in 6 months and first draft in, please. So it's quite hard, sort of getting through that self-hatred phase at pace was a challenge again, but it helped knowing that I'd gone through it before. And so this was sort of part of the process rather than an actual indication of quality.
Yeah. Have you developed or found a community of sort of writers, like yourself, that you interact with in, where you are? And if so, how important is that community to you?
Yeah, it's definitely something I actually want to get more into. I think hopefully now COVID, to a degree, the lockdowns are not as frequent, so that it will make that sort of community building much easier, because to begin with I was locked down and you weren't going to meet anybody. I've met some people on social media and that's been really great, and again it's quite nice to see people struggling and the same things you struggle with and talking about the same parts of the process. But it's definitely something I really want to find more of, because I think it really helps. I'm used to, in my old job I had colleagues, right?
Yeah.
And now it's me alone until I hand it over to my editor or my agent, and then sort of await feedback. So definitely I think it's something that I'm going to try and look to build, because I imagine it'd be really helpful and really reassuring to have that kind of support system.
Yeah, it's
so
one
people
thing.
actually know what it's like.
Yeah, because writing can be a solitary process. I mean, typically it is, right? You're creating your story pretty much in a vacuum, but to have other people to sort of commiserate with and just to support, just writers, I think, are very good at supporting other writers. There's a hashtag on Instagram, authors supporting authors. That's pretty popular.
Is there?
Yeah, you gotta check that one out. Authors supporting authors. It's a good one. Well, I've got some fun questions for us, for you, really, because no one cares what I think.
That's not true.
I always like to, get to know people, and one way I get to know people is by asking them about pop culture. So one of the things that I always love to start off with is, did you have any favorite TV shows when you were growing up? What did you like to watch, if anything? And this is a tricky question for authors, because sometimes they say, I didn't watch much TV, but I'm curious. Did you watch any, and what did you watch?
God, everything. So I watched, we were really lucky. We had such great BBC dramas, anything period drama I watched. I used to watch Robin Hood, was a huge thing for me. Superman growing up was great. Doctor Who, big fan of Doctor Who. And then, sorry, Kara?
I was going to say the original Doctor Who or the most recent ones that they kind of rebooted.
For Christopher Eccleston, is it Christopher Eccleston, isn't it? Onwards, but I didn't watch the originals, but I used to love that. Anything, I was a big fan of Gossip Girl, of 90210, anything with a good pacey plot. I was into.
Oh my gosh,
for sure.
90210 was so in my wheelhouse, because I was the same age as they were in high school. So I think the show picked up their junior year in high school, maybe. And that's what I was when I started, that show came out my junior year, they were juniors, and I followed them through college. I mean, I literally went to college with these people. And then we had our first careers together. So it was very fun. I miss Brandon. He and I were friends, and Steve always made me laugh. But that's a great show. That and Melrose Place too. I watched Melrose to the bitter end.
I never saw that. No. Great.
You gotta watch Melrose. I mean, they crossed over with 90210 in one or two episodes.
Okay, that makes more sense. Sometimes when you see a crossover episode, but you don't know it's crossover, so you're like, why are these strange new characters arriving?
That's right. I think Jake from Melrose was doing work on Kelly's House or something. I can't remember, but Melrose was great, trashy TV. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's a huge place for sort of delicious trash, isn't there?
Oh god,
stuff where you're trash. Like, this is great, and they're giving it to me really easily, and I love that.
I just started watching New Girl with my daughter.
Great.
I saw the pilot episode. I was flying on a plane. This goes back to 2011. I was on a flight, and they had TV, so I was watching, and I laughed. Me and my seatmate, who I had no idea who this person was, we were both watching it, and we were like idiots on the airplane. We were laughing so hard. And the other night, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to start watching that show, because I was out of shows. I needed a laugh. I didn't want anything heavy. And my daughter and I started watching it, and we just laughed like idiots. So funny. So funny.
So funny. Oh God, yeah, that whole age of TV. Because I think what was on? I think is we get things a bit later for the new. So so we had that a couple when I was at sort of university, and that's great. Love that. That has got a fantastic slow burn, will they, won't they romance.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the greats.
Yeah, totally agree. How about musical artists? Who did you like listening to kind of growing up, or even now? Like, who do you like to listen to?
Taylor Swift.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Now, country or pop Taylor, or both?
Both. I think the thing is, there's a tailor for every mood. So, you know,
Yeah.
she'll give you something any day of the week. I do love country, so big fan of Dolly Parton. I love Carrie Underwood. Yeah, that's fantastic. My favorite band is probably a band called the Cat Empire, which is this Australian band. That's fantastic. Love them. But yeah, I think Taylor. I was actually on, the Spotify Unwrapped each year gives you the stats, and I was in the top 2% of Taylor Swift listeners last year, which I am very proud of. Thank you.
I took my daughter and my son to see Taylor Swift. And my other daughter would have gone too, but she was on a trip, so she couldn't go. This was, I don't know, like 5 years ago. And we had terrible seats. Like they were like, well, hold on. The story gets better. So nosebleed seats. That morning I went on and I looked, I'm like, are there any better seats available? Because sometimes that happens where, people don't show or they try to sell their tickets. I found 4 floor seats. And I gobbled them up. I sold right there. So right on the floor, I gobbled them up. Now, when we got there, like right behind us, there was a big gap between our seats and the next section of seats. It was like a thoroughfare. And we were in between like a B stage and a C stage. So all of a sudden, Taylor like is on like this like trapeze and she goes to the B stage. We're seeing her. And then next thing I know, like right behind us, there are all these security guards lined up. And it's because she was going to walk right behind us to get to the other stage. So we turn around and there she is walking and shaking everyone's hand. And she shook all of our hands. And I was filming it. So my daughter and her friend were just like going bananas. Like it was like the Beatles coming into like, whatever, Ed Sullivan or something.
Amazing.
I was dad of the year for about 25 minutes.
That's a lot of points. Yeah.
25 minutes. And then the effects wear off. So yeah. But she's fantastic. She's fantastic.
She is fantastic. She is fantastic. Yeah. And I think we're getting a bit of a Taylor renaissance now when everyone realizes, oh yeah, she's actually brilliant.
No, she's really nice. A great songwriter. And seems to be a good human being too. From what I can tell.
Exactly. And she's someone who's not afraid to get caught trying. That's what I think. So she tries everything. That's inner child.
I think she has to get, caught trying because that's what fuels her creativity. I mean, like a lot of missteps, fuel her songwriting, but I digress. How do you feel when you're staring at a blank sheet of paper or computer screen and you need to write something? What emotions do you experience at the blank page?
Panic, despair, for sure. Distress, shame, all of the above. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So what do you do? How do you deal with it?
So if I'm really struggling, I actually just go to pen and paper, and I find that much less daunting than a page, because you can kind of like transition from like a brainstorm mind map to writing, so it's sort of an easier step. Early doors, if I'm doing a first draft, I'm very strict. I have a rule I have to do 1,000 words a day during that first draft stage. I don't edit, I don't delete anything. They could be 1,000 unrelated words, but 1,000 words. So that sort of weirdly, having a rule like that really weirdly frees me up sometimes, because you can just sort of like bash away and you just like spend a while describing furniture, and then you're like, oh, and actually maybe someone says this, and then you suddenly are into dialogue. And dialogue for me comes much easier than transitions and descriptions and things like that. So yeah, but it's a horrible feeling when you can't get anything down.
But at least you have a ways of dealing with it. So that's for good. Sure. I like the idea of going to like paper and pencil or pen. Because there is a different, I don't know if it's a different brain process when you are doing something physically with your hand and you're drawing the letters versus typing them on the keyboard.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're tricking your muscles because you're moving and your brain starts to think as well. I think I don't know why. It should be the same, shouldn't it? But it is so different. You're right.
Yeah, but it's almost like it's artistic in a way. And I think that's a way of, I always forget if the right brain is logical and the left brain is artistic, but there's a way of exercising one of those sides of the brain just by drawing something, even if you're just doodling in the margins, that can get your mind going. So
yeah, I love doodling. Big fan of that. That helps.
Yeah, me too. Like I'm terrible at it, but I have doodles all over everything. Because kind of this is obviously your first novel. It's out in the world. What lesson, if any, about publishing do you feel like you learned the hard way?
That's a good question. I think sort of the slight panic of having your book out there and you can't get it back. That floored me, that I had a bit of panic about that, and sort of seeing people like discussing it, reviewing it without my permission. And I thought I had quite a pretty thick skin, and even the slightest bit of criticism and then you're like, oh my god, how dare you, and I'm terrible, I'm a worm, I'm awful. So that was the hard bit. Was actually, I was like, oh, you have to get a thicker skin very fast, because people are allowed to discuss your work. Of course they are, because they're reading it. That's brilliant. And B, to protect yourself. So don't go looking at reviews, because I've been really lucky in that it's so far everyone's been really nice and gorgeous. But like that you can, I don't know, it's a rabbit hole you shouldn't go down. You sort of have to have an equilibrium of self-worth that doesn't take too much external stuff in. Is sort of, I think, what I've learned so far.
Yeah, there's definitely a vulnerability to putting your work out in the world, right? You open yourself up to criticism from everybody. But
Yeah.
the way I think, and someone told me this recently talking about reviews is, the reviews are not for you. They're not for your ego.
Yeah.
They're for other readers. So, and it is tempting though, right? Because you want that validation. Like you want to know, do people like what I'm doing? But I think the fact that I was going to say the fact that you have an agent who believes in you, an editor who worked hard for you, a publisher who put the book out there, like there are people who believe in you, and you don't really have to worry about what the reviews say so much. But
no, that's true. Yeah. And also there's sort of a masochistic bit that comes in, doesn't it? Where you're like, I bet I could find a bad one. And you start like looking in like a chaotic, self-destructive mood.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like pulling on a scab. Yeah.
You're feeding that inner imposter that's inside you, right? Saying, I can't possibly.
Exactly.
But you are.
Yeah. Someone knows out there that I'm a fake, and I will find them.
And I will find them, and I will love them in a weird way. Just to wrap up here, if you could go back in time and give advice to your younger self, maybe that younger Sophie who had dreams of becoming a writer someday, and who of course wound up putting those dreams on hold for a while, but what would you tell that younger self, that who's still full of hope and possibility? What would you tell them, knowing what you know now?
I guess that it's not embarrassing to try, and it's natural to start off being bad, and then you will get better, and the only way to get better is to try. I think that's what I would.
I love that. I mean, think about anything we do in life, right? Learning how to walk, for example, or even learning how to stand up, right? Think about learning how to stand up when you're kids. You fall down a lot before you get back up, right? But with kids, before you can get up on your own two legs. But as kids, they just keep trying. They're persistent. They keep trying. They don't care. They don't care if they look stupid just falling on there. Later on in life, we feel like we have to be perfect at everything out of the gate. But, because we have to I think this is going back to that inner child, right? Like a lesson from them is, hey, you might look stupid, but just get back up and do it. And writing is a muscle. It's a verb, but it's also like a muscle you've got to develop. And the only way to do it is to just keep doing it.
Keep doing it. Yeah, exactly. And that you have to wade through that bit of, trying to stand falling for ages. And that's part of it. Yeah. Uncomfortable though it is.
Well, the author, of course, is Sophie Irwin. The book we're talking about is her debut, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting. It's been a very fun conversation. Sophie, before I let you go, do you have a website or social media that we can share with the listeners of Uncorking a Story?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Instagram at sophie.irwin, and I'm on Twitter at Sophie H. Irwin.
Sophie H. Irwin. There we go. And I'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes. so people can just look that up easily enough without having to write it down. If you're in your car, don't write it down now. That's not a smart decision. So
driving.
very good. Sophie, this has been a great, fun, insightful conversation. I feel better about myself after this one. I hope you do too.
I know, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.